Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classes of Mail. My name is Alan Gigax, and as promised on a not promised, but as I said on a previous episode, the full language of Arbitrator Nolan's decision is out, and I found it kind of interesting, so I am going to read it along with you. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is the award of Dennis R. Nolan, Interest Arbitrator. Introduction. Pursuant to Section 1207 of Title 39 of the U.S. Code, the Postal Reorganization Act, and it's got the laws listed here, the U.S. Postal Service and the National Association of Letter Carriers enjoy substantial rights to bargain collectively over the wages, hours, and working conditions of the employees represented by the union. When the parties cannot achieve a new contract through voluntary agreement, the PRA provides for a process of dispute resolution that may culminate in final and binding arbitration. The Act further authorizes the parties to establish the specific or even alternative processes for resolving the collective bargaining disputes. Pursuant to such authority, the NALC and USPS entered into an agreement on February 26, 2025, Attachment 1, that appointed me as the neutral and sole arbitrator and authorized me to issue a final and binding award to resolve all outstanding issues. The agreement provided that I would conduct a mediation before convening a formal arbitration hearing. The agreement authorized me to issue a final and binding award based on the parties' presentations, agreements, and stipulations during mediation. This award constitutes the final and binding award establishing the terms of the 2023 National Agreement. Background. All right, before we get into the background, so this is what he's laid out already is what gives him the authority to make this decision. And it looks like it didn't go to arbitration. It was settled during mediation, but he'll probably get into it a little bit more. The USPS is an independent establishment of the executive branch of the government of the United States, authorized to provide universal mail services to the American public, 39 U.S.C. Sections 101 and 201. The Postal Service was created by the PRA in 1971 and is the successor to the former Post Office Department. The NLC is a national labor organization representing over 200,000 employees of the USPS in the city letter carrier craft. The 2019 to 2023 National Agreement expired on May 20th, 2023. Prior to that time, the parties engaged in extensive and good faith negotiations to achieve a successor agreement. Well, I don't know how good faith it was on our end, but I will keep reading. The parties were not successful in reaching a tentative agreement by the expiration date of the contract. Oh, dude, not even close. However, the parties continued to meet and negotiate in their attempt to conclude a voluntary agreement. After many months of good faith negotiations, the parties reached a tentative agreement on October 18, 2024. However, in the ratification vote held on the TA, the majority of the NALC members who cast a ballot voted against the TA. After the rejection of the TA, the NALC and the USPS resumed negotiations, but no second tentative agreement was reached. You know, I have a feeling if a second tentative agreement were reached, it would have looked an awful lot like this award. All right, moving on. And we would have voted no on that one too. The USPS and the NALC have a long and productive bargaining relationship in which most collective bargaining contracts have been achieved through good faith negotiations and voluntary agreements. Nevertheless, there have been some occasions when interest arbitration has been necessary to resolve the terms of a successor agreement. Interest arbitration by its nature is a protracted, litigation-oriented proceeding that significantly lengthens the dispute resolution process. Especially given the timing of this dispute in the collective bargaining cycle, the desire of the parties to establish a dispute resolution process that would resolve the terms of the successor agreement in less time than a traditional interest arbitration is most understandable. Plus, we have the potential pressure of not having a contract when the Trump administration comes calling. How much difference is that going to make? Well, I guess time will tell. The MOU established a process that permits a quicker resolution while still providing the parties with a full and fair opportunity to make their cases, argue their positions, present information on their issues, and otherwise ensure that the mediator/arbitrator is fully aware of the matters that are important to each of the parties. Moreover, I am very familiar with many of the economic issues underlying the present dispute. In 2020, I served as chairman of the Interest Arbitration Board that was convened to resolve the impasse following the expiration of the 2016 to 2019 National Agreement. During that proceeding, we had 9 intensive days of hearings over the course of a month. The board received oral and written testimony from expert witnesses, management officials, national and local union officers, and rank-and-file letter carriers. But that's interesting. I wonder how you get chosen to be a rank-and-file letter carrier who's going to come up here and talk to this arbitrator. Both parties also submitted data on the economics, finances, and operations of the Postal Service, as well as data comparing letter carriers' compensation to that of private sector workers. The parties agreed that I could consider all this previously submitted evidence, as well as updated and current evidence in formulating the present award. Dude, so does that mean that he took into account like what UPS and FedEx get paid? And I don't know. The mediation sessions took place in Washington, D.C. on March 17th and 18th, 2025. Both parties were represented by counsel and fully presented their positions. Each party insisted firmly on its own position, but worked professionally and cooperatively to reach a fair outcome. Next, we have positions of the parties. Without attempting to be exhaustive, the following summarizes some of the parties' major arguments. All right, now we get to the interesting stuff. Here we go. The Postal Service argued the following points. Wage and benefit comparability remains the statutory standard. The statute requires that the Postal Service achieve and maintain wages and benefits, quote, on a standard of comparability to the compensation and benefits paid for comparable levels of work in the private sector of the economy, end quote. 39 U.S.C. Section 1003A, see also 39 U.S.C. Section 101C. Next, city letter carriers enjoy a generous wage and benefits package, including highly competitive wages, a semi-annual cost of living adjustment that is unheard of in the private sector, and retirement and retiree health programs that are the envy of private sector workers. This package exceeds private sector comparability. Labor economic experts firmly support this conclusion from analyses of robust databases that enable a comparison between the pay of city carriers to the pay of private sector workers with characteristics comparable to city letter carriers, as well as databases that compare the city carrier job to jobs in the private sector that are rated to be at a comparable level of work. Experts in benefits and job matching further support the conclusion that there is still work to do to adjust city carrier compensation to align more closely with private sector comparability. All right, so they bring up some points there that, like, our retiree benefits are expensive. And we know, like, that's a huge part of why the post office wasn't profitable for a long time, because, like, we were pre-funding retiree health benefits. And obviously we don't have to do that anymore. But it says here, retirement and retiree health programs that are the envy of private sector workers. That's probably true. Most retirees are probably left to just get on Medicare. That would be my assumption. I don't know. I have very little knowledge about the retirement process. I'm still 10 years away from my own. But I'm going to presume that what they're saying here is true. All right, moving on. Past interest arbitrators have held that postal employees, this is continuing the Postal Service's argument, management's argument. Past interest arbitrators have held that postal employees, including city letter carriers, have wage premiums and have issued awards intending to reduce wage growth as compared to the private sector, a practice referred to as moderate restraint, and initially established by arbitrator Clark Kerr in the 1984 interest arbitration with the Joint Bargaining Committee, consisting of the NALC and one other union. That was probably the APWU. This Clark Kerr sounds like a real jerk. Moderate restraint. Dude, I want unrestrained wage growth. All right, moving on. Interest arbitration awards, whether issued after a failed TA or not, must continue to be intentional about reducing the postal private sector compensation gap. If there's a gap, I don't feel like we're on the good end of the gap. But when you bring in things like Amazon drivers and like gig workers, I'm sure their benefits are terrible. And, there may be some argument there. Obviously, we try to compare ourselves to the most professional end of, full-time UPS and FedEx drivers and things like that. But it makes sense that the post office, trying to keep our wages down, would argue with a broader interpretation of who we compare to. Next point. The existence of the TA should not be ignored. Oh, here it is. Yeah, so this is what Renfro agreed to in the first place. And he said, yeah, this is good. Let's put it before. And he spent all this time telling us how great it was. And here it is, right in their arguments. The existence of the TA should not be ignored. While the arbitrator is not bound by the TA, it reflects what both parties, after good faith negotiations, considered to be an acceptable agreement. There it is. Just like Corey and David Noble and others said what happened, there's the argument. It reflects what both parties, after good faith negotiations, considered to be an acceptable agreement. Dude. Indeed, there have been 2 occasions in postal history when interest arbitrators have resolved new contracts after a failed ratification vote. The first was the Healy Award in 1978. The second was the award by Herbert Fishgold in 2007 with the rural carriers. These 2 awards neither impose the failed TA without change, nor do they take the TA as a floor and add terms more favorable to the union. Rather, they issued awards that made adjustments on both sides of the ledger with end results that could be summed up as different but not more. Yeah. I mean, that's it, right? We had that tentative agreement and it was put out. Renfro kept saying how good it was. And the arbitrator, the post office is going to run with that argument, and it looks like the arbitrator believed him. The level of increases, next point. The level of increases and projected increases in the Employment Cost Index, as well as the Consumer Price Index, which impacts the cost of living adjustment, supports a moderate restraint pay package that is less than that found in the TA. The recent agreement between United Parcel Service and the Teamsters affecting package delivery drivers has little or no relevance to this proceeding. Oh, really? A singular focus on UPS is inconsistent with the statutory comparability mandate, which requires a comparison to, quote, comparable levels of work, end quote, throughout the private sector as a whole. There is obvious bias in any fixation with one cherry-picked employer. Moreover, the NALC has tried for over 40 years to get an interest arbitrator to agree to a UPS standard, but the union has failed each and every time. Finally, there are significant differences in job duties, work rules, and company pay policies that further militate, I don't know that word, militate, against any direct comparison of UPS positions to those in the Postal Service. Okay, I looked it up, and militate is a verb that means to be a powerful or conclusive factor in preventing. So it militates against any direct comparison of UPS positions to those in the Postal Service. There you go. It prevents those things from happening. All right, next point. City carrier assistants are an effective and successful part of the city carrier workforce. I mean, management's going to make this argument. This is the one that probably hurts me the most because our CCAs get such a raw deal. But let's go on and see what management goes on to say. They serve as entry-level workers who provide workforce flexibility and labor cost restraint. Data analysis reveals that workers hired as CCAs receive a substantial increase in pay in comparison to their previous employment. Any diminution in the number of hours of CCAs necessarily puts added pressure on the compensation and work rules that benefit the career carrier. All right, so they're saying, whatever job CCA had before they took this one, it was worse. And maybe that's true. That's not unlike car insurers who say, like, the average person who switched saved 15% over their previous carrier. Yeah, because that's the reason they switch. If they were going to pay more than their previous carrier, they wouldn't switch. So, this is the same kind of argument here with CCAs. Yeah, of course they're not going to take a downgrade in their next job. So, anyway, and they're making the argument here that if we're going to give CCAs less hours or have less CCAs, then it's going to hurt career carriers. To me, the solution is more career carriers. Maybe the union will make that argument on its end. All right, next point. The Postal Service continues to face strong business challenges. Due to the nature of its mission, the Postal Service is heavily labor-intensive. Personnel costs occupy the vast majority of postal expenses. The Postal Service must compete in the highly competitive package delivery business, but it is running annual financial deficits. It cannot absorb above-market compensation rates and be successful. Well, this is financial consideration, and the argument here, the whole argument of this is, are we paid above market compensation rates? Next, the generosity of the TA as a compromise agreement should not be underappreciated. Well, here again, they're citing the TA as, look, this is what both parties agreed to. Included among its provisions were wage increases consistent with historical patterns and additional adjustments for the most senior employees and retention of the cost of living adjustments that protect wages against inflation in ways not found in the private sector. While the reasons for the disapproval of the TA cannot be stated with certainty, even if employees feel that they should receive higher pay, such subjective feelings simply are not evidence that their wages should be increased. Based on the relevant evidence, there is no credible basis, either as a matter of comparability or pattern, for a net increase in the economic terms of the TA. Indeed, the evidence supports lowering the TA's economic impact. All right, that's the end of management's arguments. Now we get into the NALC's arguments. First, the NALC active membership overwhelmingly rejected the tentative agreement reached in late 2024, 71% to 29%. In a post-vote poll of active members by Hart Research, 85% of no voters indicated that higher general wage increases than the 1.3% annual increase in the TA were needed. Improved uniform allowances were also supported by a supermajority of such voters. The members' concerns must be addressed in the arbitrator's award. Next, the comparability standard of the PRA, that's the Postal Regulatory Act or Postal Reform Act, reorganization, anyway, the law that makes the post office, requires that postal employees be paid no less than private sector employees performing similar work. The best private sector comparator is the United Parcel Service, UPS, package car driver, employed by the only other nationwide unionized parcel business, and who, like the USPS city letter carrier, delivers packages on a fixed route. UPS drivers earn more than city letter carriers from their first day on the job, hit the top of their pay scale years earlier than city letter carriers do, and earn a much higher wage at the top of the pay scale. So this speaks to what the management was arguing, that we're cherry picking UPS. And obviously I'm fine with picking those cherries. What we do is comparable to what UPS does. Moving on. Letter carriers are below the comparability standard even when one compares them to the entire private sector workforce. Since 2009, average private sector wages have risen about 3 times faster than city letter carrier wages. After decades earning more than the average American worker, city letter carriers now earn less, and markedly less than comparable private sector workers, i.e. full-time, unionized, or large employer staff. So here they're comparing us to the workforce as a whole, not just to other delivery companies. And yeah, our wage growth has not grown as much as those other industries, as much as other industry in general. Next. Even as city letter carriers have become more productive as measured by deliveries per route and by the USPS's measure of labor productivity, their real wages have steadily declined to the point that the purchasing power of the straight-time wages of the average carrier is now 20% below where it was in 1972. In particular, the inflation surge of 2021 to 2022, when the consumer price index topped 9%, sharply reduced the purchasing power of city letter carrier wages. CCAs, who have the lowest wages and no COLA protection, were hit particularly hard. All right, so here the CPI hit 9%, and if our COLAs are based on the CPI, why aren't our COLAs 9%? Why are we losing purchasing power? If we have these cost of living adjustments, isn't that what the cost of living adjustment is supposed to do? To keep our purchasing power at least stagnant? Dude, I'm missing something with these COLAs. And maybe one of you guys can write to me and explain to me what I'm missing, because it doesn't feel like our COLAs are keeping up with actual inflation. Next point. NALC acknowledges USPS's financial difficulties, but the PRA's comparability standard, as well as economic reality, require that USPS pay no less than market rate wages. An arbitrator's award in this dispute cannot remedy the financial difficulties of the USPS, but such an award must improve wages to meet the comparability standard in the PRA. To me, this is an excellent argument. We have a legal requirement to pay us this comparable wage, and it doesn't say we can pay this comparable wage as long as we're making money. Next, to achieve the service excellence outlined in Delivering for America, USPS's 10-year business plan, USPS has to invest not only in its network and processing systems, but also in its delivery workforce by paying competitive wages that will allow it to attract and retain capable and committed employees. And that's definitely something that seems like it's taken a hit, that now that we don't have attractive starting wages, we're not attracting as high a caliber of employee. Next, USPS is by volume the largest shipping service in the country, 6.6 billion packages, and now earns more from delivering parcels, 32 billion, than from first-class letter mail, 25 billion. So succeeding in the highly competitive package industry is critical to USPS's economic future. To prosper and increase its market share in the expanding package business, USPS must pay its workforce the wages needed to attract and retain capable and committed employees. It's a good argument. Next, most newly hired letter carriers start out as CCAs. Based on data collected by Lightcast Analytics in 2023, current CCA pay lagged far behind that offered newly hired FedEx, negative 5.7%, and Amazon, negative 13.9% delivery workers. Next, the existing entry-level wage paid to CCAs is so low that from 2021 to 2023, USPS received no applicants for nearly a quarter of the open CCA positions it posted. Even when it manages to hire CCAs, they quit at alarming rates, with annual turnover rates averaging between 45% and 60% in recent years, and reaching up to 100% in higher cost areas. Dude, that's brutal. A lot of that is pay. Some of that is hours. Some of that is management mistreatment. I mean, there's so many things wrong with our model right now with bringing in CCAs. And it's nice to see them spend some time arguing that we have this CCA problem. It is disappointing to see how poorly they make out in the ultimate agreement. Next, USPS's struggle to hire has led to staffing shortages in many locations. Staffing shortages that have left routes unattended, customers upset, and carriers overworked and demoralized. The non-career CCA category should be eliminated in favor of an all-career workforce. It is disappointing that argument did not hold sway. Next, regardless of classification, starting pay for letter carriers must be substantially increased. Eliminating the lowest paid steps of Table 2 of the career carrier pay scale to increase the starting pay to the Table 1 starting rate and reducing the time to reach top step pay will also help alleviate staffing shortages while at the same time providing more junior career carriers with much needed economic relief. Okay, so this is the one that was added in after people complained about the tentative agreement. Now they're saying, yes, Table 1 and all career and shorter time to top step. So that was thrown in there. I mean, I don't know that, obviously, but that's certainly the way it seems. Next, it is also critically important to raise pay at the top step of the city letter carrier pay scale. Approximately 35% of the career workforce is at that step P now, and eventually all carriers who stay on the job will reach that step. Raising top scale pay thus provides the best economic value in the long term to the letter carrier craft. In addition, raising top scale pay will boost retirement benefits. Next point. Since USPS requires that city letter carriers wear uniforms on the job, it should furnish them with uniforms. Unfortunately, the existing system of uniform allowances, under which USPS provides stipends to carriers to purchase their shoes, coats, and uniforms for all weather conditions, is irretrievably broken. Current allowances don't come close to covering the actual cost of adequate uniforms. As long as this outdated system remains in place, USPS should provide city carriers a uniform allowance that reflects the rapidly rising prices charged by uniform vendors, which rose by nearly 50% between 2019 and 2023. NALC believes that reality merits a significant increase in the allowances. All right, and that concludes the NALC arguments. Now we get to the award. So before we do that, I mean, in fairness, the NALC is making the arguments that, the law requires us to be paid comparably, that we have to attract better quality of new hires, and we have to keep those new hires, that we don't get enough money for our uniforms, so that the uniform system we have is not working. And, these are things that do need to be addressed. And notice nowhere in there is there anything about the work rules, because it certainly appears, as was indicated in interviews with Renfro, that all those work rules are just going to be stipulated and that they are going to be in the new contract. We won't know for sure until we actually see the new contract. But so far, that's certainly the way it appears, and I have no reason to believe otherwise. All right, so here we go to the award. By federal law, the party's interest arbitrator must issue an award determining the wages, benefits, and work rules for employees in the city letter carrier craft after giving the parties a full and fair, quote, opportunity to present their case in person, by counsel, or by other representatives they may elect, end quote. 39 U.S.C. Section 1207. In addition, the arbitrator must take into account the following statutory provisions. 39 U.S.C. Section 101C provides, as an employer, the Postal Service shall achieve and maintain composition for its officers and employees comparable to the rates and types of compensation paid in the private sector of the economy of the United States. It shall place particular emphasis on opportunities for career advancements of all officers and employees and the achievement of worthwhile and satisfying careers in the service of the United States. Well, there you go. So he's citing that right in his decision that, yes, we have to make this pay comparable. And then we got what we got. The USPS argues that we're already getting overpaid. I don't know. I don't see it, but this is his decision. All right, moving on. 39 U.S.C. Section 1003A provides, in part, it shall be the policy of the Postal Service to maintain compensation and benefits for all officers and employees on a standard of comparability to the compensation and benefits paid for comparable levels of work in the private sector of the economy. This award complies with these statutory provisions. Moreover, this award presents a fair and reasonable outcome for both parties given the uncertainties the Postal Service and its employees face, the parties' presentations, and the contractual history of the parties. The contract will operate for 3 years, May 21st, 2023 to May 22nd, 2026. While this duration does mean that the parties will soon be back at the negotiating table, I do not regard that as a negative. The parties have a history of successful bargaining, and they should be given the opportunity to establish the terms of their contract in those subsequent years. Some of the major terms of the award include 3 general wage increases of 1.3%, 1.4%, and 1.5% for career employees. Continuation of the COLA provisions consistent with the current formula. An additional $1,000 to be added to the top step. This will be implemented and effective upon implementation within 180 days of the date of this award. Elimination of the bottom 2 steps to raise the starting wage for career employees. This will be implemented and effective upon implementation within 180 days of the date of this award. City carrier assistant employees receive the same general increases as described above for career employees, plus an additional 1% each year. Additional 50 cents per hour increase for CCAs. This will be implemented and effective upon implementation within 180 days of this award. The uniform allowance will be increased as set forth in detail below. All right, and then we have a long listing of some of the language here that none of this is particularly that useful. It's all basically been covered in his summary, but there are a couple of things that I want to go over. So one is it talks in here about the cost of living and how that is modified or how that's done. And so here let's see, where is this? This is Section 3, cost of living adjustment, and then we go down to C. The basic salary schedules provided for in Table 1 and Step P of Table 2 of this agreement shall be increased 1 cent per hour for each full 0.4 of a point increase in the applicable index above the base index. So there's the formula. If there's a 0.4 increase in the cost of living, then we get a 1 cent increase. I'd like to see the math on that, like how that actually works out. Are those things equivalent? I doubt it. I don't know, but that's the formula. And then the steps A through O, they get that same percentage increase applied to them. So if the cost of living gives me at step P a 2% increase, then the person at step B is also going to get a 2% increase. Of course, it's going to be a lower dollar amount because it's 2% of their wage that is being increased. So that's how that is handled. It is adjusted proportionally to its percentage. All right, moving on. Something else that was worthwhile in here is the let's see. What was the next thing? So steps AA and A will be eliminated from Table 2 as soon as administratively practicable, but no later than 180 days following the date of the award and will be effective upon implementation. So look at that. I mean, this should happen. Is there some reason why this would take 6 months to eliminate those 2 steps? I don't think so. As soon as administratively practicable, I mean, this is all done on computers. Is there a reason why it should take more than a week? I don't see one, but I don't know what the process is, but that's something. It should be as soon as practical. So that's that. And then of course we've now eliminated step 1 or Table 1, because it says here all city carriers at Step P in Table 1 will be administratively slotted as soon as practicable into Step P in Table 2. And that's it. Table 1 is no more. We have the Uniform Control Committee, and they're going to meet at least once every 3 months and at such other times as may be necessary, and they're going to do that important work. So I guess that's something. Let's see, what else do we have here? This is the big one. Other provisions. Except as otherwise indicated herein, all contractual modifications in the TA shall be included in the new contract. The terms take effect on the date of issuance of this award unless otherwise indicated. Dude, so that means that like the new overtime lists, those take effect today, or when you're reading this, or when you're hearing this, these are already in effect. So how's that going to be rolled out? I don't know. Pay adjustments that take effect prior to the date of this award shall be paid retroactively, consistent with the party's established practice. The parties will separately determine the implementation plan for the changes in Article 8. All right, so there you go. That's the deal with that. And the foregoing constitutes the final and binding resolution of the parties' dispute over the terms of their collective bargaining agreement, dated March 21st, 2025. Dennis R. Nolan, arbitrator. That's it, guys. That is the new contract, and it is signed by Doug Tolino and Brian Renfro, February 26th, 2025. And, dude, it's done. It's over. We have a new contract. When we get the language, I will go over those changes with you. I've been thinking about completely rereading the contract, doing it this time with commentary like I did for the ELM, and dropping the accents, because that was definitely a failed experiment. But in the meantime, that's a straight scoop on what the arbitrator did, what the arbitrator decided. So as I get more information, of course, I will pass it along to you, because that's always part of our mission here at Classes of Mail, to empower city letter carriers. So thanks for listening, guys. If you want to reach out to me, maybe about the COLA provisions, for example, classesofmail@gmail.com. All right, take care, guys. Catch you next time.